2023. The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to News 9. I'm Verghese Abraham. First up, we have the war between Israel and Hamas has entered its 50th day. Let's get you the latest update on your screens on what exactly is happening on this day. First batch of hostages has been released as Israel and Hamas truce begins, an interval of pauses just before both the sides said that they will carry on with the war. 13 Israeli captives, 10 Thai citizens and 1 Filipino has been released from Gaza. 39 Palestinian women and children have freed from Israeli jails. Israeli officials stress fighting could resume after the pause. This is to say that it is not going to be a letdown on the fighting front. War would not stop until all of Israel's aims are achieved. This is what Netanyahu has reiterated, some of them asking as to what would be the complete objective. One of it being the complete annihilation of Hamas is one of the stated objectives of the IDF's military operation in Gaza. Meanwhile, 13 hostages have been released is what we understand, and 10 of them are in fact Thai citizens and 1 is a Filipino who was released from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant monitored the situation unfold as hostages began to leave Gaza and entered into the Rafah crossing. Netanyahu said that the release of the first batch of hostages was only one of the goals of the war and that his government was committed to achieving all the goals of the war.
נשים נוספות, כל אחת ואחת מהן עולם ומלואו. אבל אני מדגיש לכם, למשפחות ולכם אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו מחויבים להחזרת כל חטופינו. זוהי אחת ממטרות המלחמה, ואנחנו מחויבים להשיג את כל מטרות המלחמה.
The IDF spokesperson has summarized that in the past 24 hours, as Israel concludes the initial day of releasing hostages, a temporary halt in the conflict with Hamas has taken place. Let's take a look.
It has been 49 days since the Hamas massacre on October 7th. Today is the first day of the hostage release, a war that we will not stop until Hamas has been dismantled. Tonight, the world watched and breathed a collective sigh of relief when they saw some of our hostages returning home. But we must never lose sight of what we cannot see. The mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, grandparents, grandchildren, sisters, brothers, and babies. Babies who were not reunited with their loved ones, who are still being held by Hamas. We do not forget that they are waiting for us, the Israel Defense Forces, to fulfill our duty, our sacred mission, bring all our hostages home and keep fighting the savage terrorists of Hamas who abducted them in the first place. Seeing the faces of 2-year-old Aviv Katz, 85-year-old Yafa Adar, and all the faces of the 24 hostages released tonight fills us with relief, but it also reinforces our resolve. It reminds us who we were fighting for and that we will not rest until every one of our hostages returns home. Our war is against Hamas, not against the people of Gaza. Hamas wanted this war. Hamas started this war. Israel will dismantle Hamas by the end of this war. We will never forget the Hamas massacre of October 7th, and it is our sacred duty to never let October 7th happen. Ever again, never again.
The International Red Cross officially announced the commencement of a multi-day operation aimed at facilitating the release and transfer of hostages in Gaza and Palestinian detainees. A young Palestinian freed in the exchange expressed the difficulty of finding words to describe his emotions.
This is the moment that a convoy of International Red Cross vehicles moved the first hostages to be released by Hamas in its temporary ceasefire with Israeli forces. 24 people in total, 13 are Israeli women and children, being exchanged for 39 Palestinian women and teenagers released from Israeli prisons. This Hamas video is said to show them handing off the hostages to the Red Cross. The government of Qatar, which acted as a mediator, says 10 of the remaining freed hostages are citizens of Thailand and 1 Filipino. A Reuters source briefed on the talks says the Thai citizens were released in a separate deal from the ceasefire that had not been previously reported, and all of them are men. The Thai citizens are farm workers that were abducted by Hamas during the October 7th attacks on Israel. The Red Cross is acting as a go-between in the transfer and brought their group across the border to Egypt. There were scenes of jubilation in the West Bank for the Palestinian prisoners released. Laith Othman is one of them. He says he can't find the words to express his feelings, but thanks God. More exchanges are expected to come each day as long as this very shaky ceasefire holds.
On Friday, a helicopter carrying Israeli hostages landed at the Schneider's Children's Medical Center in Israel. Freed during the 4-day truce, they have undergone initial medical checks and were set to reunite with their families. The released hostages included 4 children with family members and 5 elderly women. These are visuals of the helicopter landing at the Schneider's Children's Hospital with the released hostages. 4 children were also released along with the elderly women. They were taken up for a medical checkup. There was ambulances that were kept on standby, and the hostage release, in fact, was a coordinated effort between the healthcare, the IDF, the Hamas, as well as the mediation that was provided by Qatar and United States. Following the hostage release, Israel Hospital says children are in good physical condition. It says released child hostages are currently undergoing medical and emotional assessment by the medical and psychological team.
5 captive women arrived at Wolfson Medical Center. You are finally home, in a safe place. Our main mission at Wolfson is to provide the best medical and mental and professional care, to give you a safe and protected space together with your families. The returnees are treated by the best Wolfson medical teams at this moment, and are examined and receive a medical and mental envelope after being placed in a special complex prepared specially for them and their families.
Well, U.S. President Joe Biden has said that the release of a first batch of Israeli hostages was only a start, but a start which has gone well till now. Biden said that he and his administration had been working round the clock to secure the release of hostages and expressed hope that more hostages would be released in the coming days. Talking about the possibility of an extension in the 4-day truce, Biden said that chances of an extension were real.
Kidnapped these people. I, along with my team, have worked around the clock to secure their release. We saw the first results of this effort with the release of 2 American hostages in late October, followed by the release of 2 Israeli hostages. I've consistently pressed for a pause in the fighting for 2 reasons: to accelerate and expand humanitarian assistance going into Gaza and 2, to facilitate the release of hostages. And over the past several weeks, I've spoken repeatedly with the Emir of Qatar, the President Sisi of Egypt, and Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel to help secure this deal, to nail it down. And I want to thank all 3 leaders for their personal partnership to get this done. I've encouraged the Prime Minister to focus on trying to reduce the number of casualties while he is attempting to eliminate Hamas, which is a legitimate objective he has. That's a difficult task, and I don't know how long it will take.
Now, after more than a month of Palestinian rocket fire and Israeli airstrikes, a temporary truce on Friday brought a rare silence over the Gaza Strip. With the ceasefire taking hold, displaced Palestinians, including those from heavily bombarded areas, cautiously returned to their homes in the southern city of Khan Yunis, where the streets were filled with people on the move. Take a look.
For the first time in more than a month, Palestinian rocket fire and Israeli airstrikes fell silent over the Gaza Strip at the start of a temporary truce on Friday. As the tentative ceasefire between Israeli forces and Palestinian militants took hold, some of the hundreds of thousands of Gaza residents who fled fighting decided to try and return to whatever was left of their homes. In the southern city of Khan Yunis, which has been housing thousands of displaced families, including from heavily bombarded northern Gaza, streets were packed with people on the move. Ahmed Wael told Reuters he felt happy and at ease.
I am going back to my home. Our hearts are rested, especially because there is a 4-day official ceasefire, better than returning to live in tents. I am very tired from sitting there, without any food or water. At home, we can live. We drink tea. We make bread using fire and the oven.
The United Nations says around 2/3 of Gaza's 2.3 million residents are now homeless, including most of the population of Gaza City and the rest of the northern half of the enclave, reduced to a wasteland by Israel's assault. Israel invaded the Gaza Strip in an operation it says is aimed at destroying the Hamas Islamist movement governing the enclave, after Hamas fighters launched a surprise attack on Israeli communities, killing 1,200 people and taking hundreds of hostages. Palestinian health authorities say more than 12,000 people have been killed in the devastating Israeli assault that reduced swaths of the densely populated territory to rubble. Israeli planes dropped leaflets in the southern part of Gaza, telling residents not to attempt to return to the north, which it said remained a war zone and was not safe. Many Palestinians worried they would never be able to return. Ala al-Mubashar fled Gaza City. She sat with her children outside a hospital in Khan Yunis, watching others flood the streets.
I see people coming and going, and I swear my soul is crying. My heart is crying. I just want to go back, even if just for an hour, to see my house and the neighborhood, to see Gaza City and what happened to it.
She and her children have been living inside a school converted into a shelter.
I went back before the Jews set up a checkpoint. There was no neighborhood or anything. Everything was destroyed. What about the people? Where will they go? When there is a ceasefire, where will people go?
Once more, a Lebanese citizen, Rose Rostam, faces displacement as conflict spills over the border. She is part of the 50,000 people, as per the United Nations, forced to leave due to clashes on Lebanon's border with Israel. This marks the third instance where conflict has uprooted her life. Here's more on the story.
Rose Rostam has had her life uprooted before. This time, she's among the some 50,000 people the UN says have been displaced because of clashes on Lebanon's border with Israel. On October 7th, a war started between Gaza and Israel. Hezbollah started firing at Israel, and we live near the border in a village called Burj al-Malouk. Then the shells began to land very close. And we have children. Of course, they get very scared. We couldn't stay in the house and hear the shelling and firing. We were frightened. We then went to Sidon, to my brother-in-law's house. It marks the third time conflict has driven her from her home. During Lebanon's civil war in the 1980s, she moved twice. The first time because of Israeli bombardment. The second was to flee Palestinian militant attacks. Lebanon is a nation of displaced peoples. The influx of Palestinians following the creation of Israel in 1948 helped spark the Lebanese civil war decades later. In 2006, hundreds of thousands were displaced during the Israel and Hezbollah war. Then came Syria's civil war in 2011, which led to the arrival of 1.5 million refugees. That, combined with the 2019 financial collapse, which destroyed Lebanon's economy, has left many without an income or job. The combination of economic despair and the influx of refugees is sparking tension with locals. Meanwhile, many refugees, faced with growing hostility and low work prospects, are eyeing Europe and other countries. Rostem says her family used to be comfortable when her husband sold car parts, but he was forced to close up shop when the fighting began. Now she checks the news to see if her house was among the latest hit by rockets.
Brands based in the Western nations are facing the impact of a boycott campaign in Egypt and Jordan as the Israeli military continued its offensive in Gaza. Our next report tells you more.
This McDonald's in Giza, Egypt has seen few customers in recent weeks. When Reuters visited in early November, the inside appeared empty. That's because the fast food restaurant has been hit by a boycott over Israel's military offensive in Gaza since the Hamas attack on October 7th. The campaign has targeted Western brands in Arab countries over a sign in the window saying the franchise operator and its staff support Palestinians has done little to change those perceptions. Here's Ahmed Izzat, who lives in Cairo.
It is fundamental for us as people supporting our Palestinian brothers to at the very least stop buying the products that help the Zionist entity kill our Palestinian brothers in Gaza.
McDonald's has said it's dismayed by disinformation about its position on the conflict. Its Egyptian franchise has pledged $650,000 in aid to Gaza. An employee at the corporate offices of McDonald's in Egypt said sales at this franchise fell by at least 70% in October and November compared to the same months last year. Starbucks has also been targeted in the boycott campaign, despite the coffee giant saying it's a non-political organization. An Egyptian supplier to Starbucks and McDonald's says he's noticed client demand has slowed down by about 50%. Even smaller businesses are feeling the pinch too. Kiosk owner Issam Abu Shalabi says customers are demanding Egyptian soft drinks instead of products from Israel or the US. I see it as very wrong, he says. What does it mean to drink something or not drink it? Shalabi says if people really want to support Palestinians, they should fight alongside them. But Hassan Mahmoud, with Egypt's boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, says the campaign lets people feel like they're making an impact and hitting companies where it hurts. This Cairo supermarket says it's had an uptick in sales because it replaced boycotted products with local ones. In Jordan, this grocery store has signs warning customers if a product is being boycotted. This customer says that if a boycotted item is picked up by mistake, she would return it immediately. Still, some remain skeptical about the effectiveness of boycotts. Take-up has also been uneven, with no major impact seen in some countries, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Tunisia.
The Chinese military is holding combat training activities on its side of the border with Myanmar. The People's Liberation Army in a statement said that the training aims to test the rapid maneuverability border sealing and fire strike capabilities of the theatre troops in Southern Theatre Command. The brief statement, however, gave no details about the timing of the exercise or the number of troops that are involved. The military training of the Chinese army comes just a day after a convoy of trucks carrying goods from China into Myanmar went up in flames. Myanmar state media described the incident as an insurgent attack. The fire incident raised concerns within the Chinese administration. Chinese envoy to Myanmar met with top officials and talked about maintaining a stable border. Derek Chauvin, convicted in George Floyd's death, was stabbed in federal prison on Friday, causing serious injuries as reported by the Associated Press. Now, Floyd's 2020 death triggered a global protest against police brutality and racism after Chauvin, a white officer, knelt on the handcuffed black man's neck for over 9 minutes, was captured on video. The Federal Bureau of Prisons confirmed an assault on an unidentified inmate at the Federal Correctional Institution in Tucson, but did not confirm if it involved Chauvin. Chauvin was reportedly stabbed by another inmate, according to an anonymous source to the New York Times, citing individuals with knowledge of the matter. Now, the Bureau stated that the prison employees responded to the attack, providing life-saving measures, and the injured individual was transported to a hospital. The war in Ukraine has been going on for over a year now. Both the nations have adapted their strategies as the war has progressed. Ukrainian forces have changed their tactics in response to Russia using drones. Take a look at this report.
Hidden in the bushes somewhere at the Bakhmut section of the front line sits a Ukrainian artillery crew. 1.5 years into the war, their tactics have changed.
Before, we used to be very mobile. We would drive out to the position, shoot, then drive off, obtain new targets, and drive to a different position. Now we do everything from a hidden position. That's how it works.
The reason is sometimes heard in the air. Drones are permanently hovering over the front lines. Artillery pieces are valuable targets for both sides, so incoming fire can be frequently heard. Rather than driving around on open roads, artillery units now try to hide their equipment. A cage of wire mesh offers some protection. Kamikaze drones explode against the mesh rather than the equipment. This self-propelled howitzer has been in service for several decades. The Soviets named their artillery after flowers. This 122mm artillery piece is called a carnation. While more Western artillery has had a huge impact on the front, these Soviet-era howitzers still play a role.
I'll say it with a bit of humor. We can buy spare parts for this equipment at any car repair shop. But if NATO equipment gets out of order, we'll have to call a repair specialist who has to bring very special tools.
The crew obtains the coordinates of a target and quickly gets ready. After shooting, they immediately leave the vehicle. Every shot fired from this position increases the probability of being detected.
There is the widespread assumption that they are idiots. That is not at all the case. They also know how to fight. They know what they're doing. They evolve and learn, and so do we.
The cage is closed again and hidden from drones. The carnation waits for its next task.
Kherson was the first major city to be captured by Russia at the beginning of the Ukraine war. After months of intense fighting, Ukraine took it back. A year later, the people there are still struggling under continued attacks on their homes. Our next report tells you more.
A year after liberation, Kherson is still a dangerous place to be.
So 3 people were traveling in this car when it was hit earlier today by Russian shelling. From what we know, the driver was instantly killed. A 2-month-old baby received an injury to the head, and the mother was seriously wounded. She had to be brought to a hospital and is currently fighting for her life.
This is the baby girl, in the arms of a Ukrainian police officer, being rushed to hospital. A year after Russian forces retreated, much of the city is still a war zone. And medical facilities like this maternity hospital remain in harm's way. Medical Director Oksana Tomchenko shows us what the Russians have done since leaving. They didn't go very far. From the roof we can see the left bank of the river, from where Russian troops continue to attack the city.
During the occupation, when our city was shelled, it was point shelling, aimed at where the Russian military was stationed. The strikes were directed. Since the deoccupation, the Russians shoot wherever they want.
In the year before the war, 1,200 children were born here. Now Oksana Tomchenko says they have about 1/10 of that.
It breaks my heart that we have so few births here. I understand it's safer for women to be elsewhere, but that's our job.
Irina plans to have her baby here, despite the risks.
They are shooting, shells are constantly flying, and it makes you very nervous. You fall asleep and you don't know whether you will wake up or not, to be honest.
She already has 2 daughters, one born before the war, the other during occupation. She doesn't want to give up on the future of her family here.
We want, as parents, to show our children by our example that we need to believe in the best. We need to strive for something in our lives.
But it's been hard. Irina tells us her husband was taken prisoner during the occupation. She says their neighbor, a supposed friend, betrayed them to the Russians. This kind of betrayal has caused social traumas that will need healing in this city.
During the occupation, some of our employees were sure, I will quote now, that Russia is here forever. They were sure of it, and even spoke openly about it.
The occupation has left a complicated legacy for those who remain.
Open collaborators, those who openly supported them, no one will forgive them. Those who had to adapt, we do not call them collaborators. That is different.
1 year later, trauma runs deep in Kherson city. And with the Russians on its doorstep, the danger is far from over. As we leave, the shelling begins once again.
Geopolitical experts and analysts are keeping a close eye on the developments between Taiwan and China. Beijing sees the Taiwan as its own territory and has openly threatened to take it over by force. Washington is the island's biggest arms supplier, but Taiwanese authorities are also keen to show that they might do to defend themselves. Our next report tells you more about the issue.
To the sound of a military tune, people file in and out of Ximbin Naval Base in southern Taiwan. The Navy has opened its doors to show people how it plans to protect them. They're showing off home-produced military hardware, and this ship is the star of the show, making its public debut. The Yushan is a new amphibious transport vessel, the biggest of its kind Taiwan has ever made. Steelworker Wang Hongjun brought his daughter and nephew to take a look.
I've come to support our national defense as we face threats from China. Taiwan's awareness of the need for self-defense is relatively weak, but if the military often holds events like this, it's a chance for people to become familiar with the Navy, as well as our own national defense.
Media are welcome to take the Navy's message around Taiwan and beyond. Taiwan's defense ministry has invited media to tour the 150-meter-long vessel, which only entered service earlier this year. The aim, to send a message to its people, but also Beijing, that the island democracy is ready for war. It's a goal that's ever more pressing. Chinese military intimidation of Taiwan has soared in recent years, and Taiwan's ships may face this. China's aircraft carrier, the Shandong, which recently transited the Taiwan Strait. It's a ship that dwarfs any in Taiwan's navy. Taiwan's new home-produced gear may look flashy, but the gulf in defense capability with Beijing is vast, and it's widening. That stark imbalance worries many in Taiwan, including Cai Zonglin. He used to be a soldier, but left the army, skeptical it was battle-ready.
Regular units put too much emphasis on duties unrelated to war. I'm worried the army wouldn't be able to fight a war in its current state.
He decided to do what he could to draw attention to his worries, so he walked around Taiwan's mainland, all the way around. The 1,100-kilometer walk took 48 days. It was a one-man warning of the threat posed by Beijing.
Taiwan has always been in a more precarious situation than other countries. For people here to have no concept of national defense is really dangerous.
The government is taking some action to make people feel safer. From next year, Taiwan will extend the conscription period for men from 4 months to 1 year. But a more fundamental message underpins events like this. A reminder to Taiwan's people of the threat that made building warships like this necessary in the first place.
Semiconductor chip maker Nvidia had told customers in China that it is delaying the launch of a new artificial intelligence chip designed to comply with US export rules until the first quarter of next year. Our next report tells you more.
China must wait longer for a new AI chip made by Nvidia. Two sources told Reuters that was the message the US chipmaker delivered to customers in the country. The semiconductor, known as the H20, is designed to comply with US export rules and is the most powerful of 3 chips Nvidia has developed specifically for China. The firm was expected to launch its new products as early as this month, but sources say that's now pushed back to the first quarter of next year. They were told the H20 was delayed due to issues server manufacturers were having in integrating it. Nvidia plans 2 other chips to comply with new US export rules, the L20 and L2. The sources said the L20 faced no delays, but were unable to share information on the L2. Now the delays mean Nvidia could struggle to preserve market share against local rivals like Huawei. The US firm has bet on the chips to keep its market share in China. Nvidia was banned from shipping products including advanced AI chips by Washington's strict export rules. Those curbs give rivals like Huawei a chance to win orders that might otherwise have gone to Nvidia. Earlier this month, Reuters reported Chinese internet giant Baidu placed a big order for Huawei AI chips this year.
China is witnessing a rise in cases of pneumonia and respiratory illnesses. Clusters of such illnesses have been reported among children in northern China. Schools have been shut and pediatric hospitals are getting overwhelmed. China has informed the WHO that no new or unusual pathogen has been detected till now. Our next report tells you more.
China is grappling with a spike in respiratory illnesses as it enters its first full winter season since it lifted COVID-19 restrictions. The government is calling for vigilance. with cases among children appearing especially high in northern areas, including Beijing. On Friday, Christian Lindmeier with the World Health Organization said it doesn't look like the spike is due to unusual or new pathogens.
In the current outbreak of respiratory illnesses, the reported symptoms are common to several respiratory diseases, and as of now, at the present time, Chinese surveillance and hospital systems report that the clinical manifestations are caused by known pathogens in circulation. Mycoplasma pneumonia is a common respiratory pathogen and a common cause of pediatric pneumonia and is readily treated with antibiotics.
The situation came into the spotlight earlier this week when the WHO highlighted a report on clusters of undiagnosed pneumonia in children. That's when it asked for more information from Beijing. On Thursday, the WHO said China had responded and provided data. Both China and the WHO have faced questions about the transparency of reporting on the earliest cases of COVID-19 that emerged in late 2019. Authorities began issuing health advisories this month, warning of long waits and the risk of cross-infection at crowded hospitals. Outside the Children's Hospital in Shanghai, parents said they aren't too worried just yet.
I hope people won't blame everything on the pandemic because there is one. Let's use science to approach an issue instead.
The WHO said the rise in cases of illness could be linked to the curbing of COVID-19 rules, along with the months-long circulation of the known bugs.
Zimbabwe's government has started restricting public gatherings and food vending while monitoring burials in all areas affected by cholera. This has been a case of cholera disease spiking up in that country. Our next report tells you more.
Zimbabwe's government is imposing restrictions on public gatherings and food vending as cases of cholera soared this week. New cases of the disease jumped from 437 to over 1,200, the biggest increase since the outbreak started in February. In addition to the restrictions, the government is also monitoring burials in all affected areas. Authorities last week declared a state of emergency in the capital, Harare, which has the highest number of new infections. In the low-income Kowadzana suburb, where 7 of the capital's 13 deaths occurred, residents complained about erratic supplies of clean water, uncollected garbage, and raw sewage flowing in the streets. Resident Bertha Rawizi is receiving treatment at a cholera isolation center. She says she started feeling stomach aches, then passed yellow, watery stool. Residents here have dug up shallow wells to meet their needs, but Rawizi says they too have become contaminated, leading to confusion about which water source is safe. Harare's municipal authorities have been distributing water treatment tablets as part of efforts to fight the disease. To date, the country has recorded 155 deaths linked to cholera from around 8,800 cases, according to the health ministry. The outbreak has brought back fears from 2008, when more than 4,000 people in the southern African country died from cholera.
Novo Nordisk is investing $2.3 billion in France to increase production of popular weight loss drugs with support from French President Macron. The move addresses high demand in the EU, where supplies were rationed.
Novo Nordisk is racing to ramp up output of its in-demand weight loss drugs. The Danish firm on Thursday unveiled new investment in production capacity in Chartres, near Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron was on hand to inspect the facility. His office says he persuaded the firm to invest there at his Choose France summit earlier in the year. The company didn't comment on the claim. But it's a boost for the French leader, who has seen a global slowdown undo progress on cutting joblessness.
Where we had been destroying industrial jobs for over 12 years, we have now recreated several 100,000. Where we had destroyed 600 factories net over the previous 10 years, we have recreated 300 net over the last 5 years.
Novo is investing about $2.3 billion at the French site. That will significantly boost production capacity for Wegovy and Ozempic, its hot obesity and diabetes treatments. The company has had to ration supplies in the EU, such is the demand. Germany is considering banning exports of Ozempic, with other countries also eyeing curbs. The popularity of the drugs has made Novo Europe's most valuable firm, overtaking luxury giant LVMH. It's already announced a $6 billion investment in its native Denmark in a bid to boost output. US rival Eli Lilly is also ramping up production of its competing products.
Black Friday this year felt subdued as shoppers entered US stores after Thanksgiving. Rising inflation and interest rates has slowed spending, with TD Cowen revising estimates to 2 to 3% of the growth. Online shopping and early deals contributed to a $5.6 billion spending surge. Listen in.
This year's Black Friday appeared somewhat subdued compared to years past as shoppers sauntered into U.S. department stores after the Thanksgiving holiday. With many consumers squeezed by persistent inflation and high interest rates, U.S. holiday spending is expected to rise at the slowest pace in 5 years. Brokerage firm TD Cowen lowered its U.S. holiday spending estimate, saying it would grow by just 2 to 3% versus its previous estimate of 4 to 5%, as it forecast flat Black Friday traffic. But that could be because shoppers have already taken advantage of October and November deals, says Eric Matisoff, an analytics and data science expert at Adobe.
So retailers and consumers already are having a great holiday season. So yesterday, consumers purchased more than they've ever purchased before. We saw $5.6 billion of purchases and products yesterday bought, and then that's a 5.5% increase from year over year last year.
This couple from London, expecting the usual mad rush, was surprised to find they were first in line at Macy's in New York.
We got up at 4 to get here for 5 because we knew it opened at 6, and there's literally no one here. I'm really shocked. But happy that we're first.
The rise of online shopping has also reduced the importance of Black Friday as a single-day event. Despite warnings from some retailers of a wary consumer, a record 130.7 million Americans were expected to shop in stores and online on Black Friday this year, according to estimates from the National Retail Federation.
A huge lava flow in Sicily has grabbed everyone's attention, which is pouring out from the southeast crater of Europe's tallest and most active volcano, Mount Etna. Etna's Observatory National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology has issued an alert for all the flights flying in that particular region. This has been done keeping in mind that the International Vincenzo Bellini Airport in Catania is still functioning. Authorities are closely monitoring the situation, emphasizing the safety of air travel and local communities amid this breathtaking yet potentially hazardous volcanic activity. The world's largest iceberg, 823A, is on the move after 3 decades. The Antarctic giant, which is 3 times the size of New York City, is drifting past the Antarctic Peninsula, propelled by winds and currents. Scientists are monitoring its rare journey and are unsure if it will impact wildlife or shipping routes. Here's more on the story.
This iceberg is one of the oldest icebergs in Antarctica, as well as being the largest at the moment. And it broke off the ice shelf in 1986, and then it remained grounded on a high point of the sea floor, quite close to where it broke off, and it stayed there for about 30 years since the mid-80s. And then in the recent years, so since around 2020, we first started to see it moving a little bit, and now it's moving relatively quickly up the eastern side of the Antarctic Peninsula and out into the open ocean. Where it was grounded quite close to the continent, the ocean is very cold. It has moved around a little bit, but I think it over time, it's probably just thinned slightly and just got that little bit of extra buoyancy that's allowed it to lift off the ocean floor and get pushed by the ocean currents. You know, an iceberg of this scale has potential to survive for quite a long time in the Southern Ocean, even though it's much warmer and it will start to melt more quickly. It could still make its way reasonably far north up towards South Africa, where it can disrupt shipping.
Wildfires in Bolivia have ravaged at least 11,000 square miles of land, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Firefighters are battling the blaze despite scarce resources. Now, international aid is crucial as countries like Venezuela, Chile, Brazil and France have stepped up into help.
This indigenous volunteer firefighter in Bolivia has been battling wildfires for months. With hardly any equipment and no professional medical help, Wilson Peter Huari Chow says his task is nearly impossible.
We've been suffering with these wildfires for over 2 or 3 months. We are here every day, facing the heat, the fire, because of our love for our nation, our land, Mother Nature, and the animals. Often we don't have anything to eat. We eat a small lunch at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, but we don't have much more. We have no provisions. We need to get the water ourselves 4 or 5 kilometers away from here. Women carry the water. That is our work.
The wildfires have torn through more than 11,000 square miles of land so far this year, with firefighters and police using hoses, sprinklers, and even bottles of water to try to hold back flames. Over a dozen people have died, schools have been closed, and flights have been canceled. Guillermo Medina's community was affected.
Todo. Sembradíos, vegetaciones, injertos, capitales.
Everything was burnt. Crops, vegetation, cuttings, coffee plantations, citric plantations, banana plantations. In other words, it devastated everything. It didn't leave anything. For this reason, now we don't have anything. We have been demanding food for days because we have children and we live off agriculture.
The government has been asking for international aid, and so far Venezuela, Chile, Brazil, and France have answered.
Well, that's all in this edition of the Bulletin. Stay tuned to News 9 for further updates.
News 9 big coverage of 5 assembly polls. Mandate 2023.
Smog over cities, toxins in the air, blackened lungs, a spike in lung cancer among non-smokers.
The air quality in Delhi is so horrible. Child born today would be smoking 15 to 20 cigarette equivalent from the very first breath of his life.
60% of India's population doesn't breathe clean air even as per the Indian national standards.
It has huge effect on the lungs. So for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren, we should be 24/7 concerned about the environment.
Are you getting cancer without smoking? You needn't smoke a cigarette for your lung to turn frighteningly black. Lung cancer cases are seeing a sharp spike among India's non-smokers. Delhi homemaker Neera Srivastav was diagnosed with lung cancer in June 2022.
पूछे उनसे
ये क्यों हुआ डॉक्टर साहब? तो डॉक्टर साहब बोले कि देखिए आप स्मोक नहीं करती हैं और आप ड्रिंक भी नहीं करती हैं, तो ये पोल्यूशन है। बोले जो दिल्ली एनसीआर वगैरह में बहुत ज्यादा पोल्यूशन है।
Nobody in the family drinks or smoke, and we are not in contact of those people who drinks or smoke.
इसी के लिए अपना बचाव करते हैं। देखिए अभी वॉक तो करने के लिए जा नहीं सकते हैं बाहर, इतना भी पोल्यूशन है, और खिड़की दरवाजा खोलते नहीं है क्योंकि पोल्यूशन का डर है, तो इसलिए लगा के रखे हैं। दिन भर तो काम करते रहते हैं, तो इसलिए इस कमरे में ड्राइंग रूम में रखा हुआ है, और बेडरूम में भी एक एयर प्यूरिफायर रखा है कि रात भर सोते हैं तो उसमें चला के रखते हैं।
Neera isn't alone. A study by Medanta Medicity says half of their lung cancer patients are non-smokers.
Most of the patients were in 60s and 70s, and now the age has preponed by about decade and a half. That means there were patients in late 20s also, many in 30s, many in 40s. And when we looked at the younger population, less than 50, this figure went up to 70%. And when we looked at the less than 40 years age group, this figure went up to 100%. That's a very, very, very significant and very major and very frightening finding.
People will get their lungs choked with carbon. You may remember I had actually shown the pictures of two lungs, a person living in Himachal and a person living in Delhi. And the one whose lung was in the Himachal, from Himachal, they were baby pink. And the lungs from Delhi were like scarred with black tar. It has huge effect on the lungs, but it also has huge effects on children who are growing up.
US EPA today has a list of more than 200 called as air toxics. They occur at very small amount in the air, but cancer potency of those are very high. Even in very small and minor dosage, and if we are exposed to them over a long period of time, then that triggers cancer.
Air quality in Delhi is so horrible. Child born today would be smoking 15 to 20 cigarette equivalent from the very first breath of his life. By the time you are 30, you've been exposed to cancer-causing chemicals for 30 years and your tissues are ready to become cancerous. This is why we are seeing more and more cancer in women, more and more cancer in younger age group, and more cancers in so-called non-smokers.
Particles coming from diesel combustion, coal combustion, they are a lot more toxic than the windblown dust. In fact, WHO way back in 2012, they had specially classified diesel emissions as class 1 carcinogen for strong link with lung cancer. It is in the same bracket as tobacco smoking, asbestos, so it is really at the top bracket.
World Health Organization says that lung cancer due to pollution has increased over time. If you are vulnerable due to respiratory conditions and you are exposed to extremely high levels of pollution, then there is an immediate trigger effect. They are attributing 16% of deaths due to lung cancer to air pollution. ICMR data says that lung cancer cases have gone up from 98,270